Let's go ahead and take our seats and get started. Sorry for the delay. We had a little glitch on the Zoom meeting, so we started a little bit late. All right, good afternoon, everyone. This is the Shoreline Preservation Working Group meeting, and I would like to ask our interpreters to explain how to access interpretation. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon. Announcement from interpreter. To use interpretation feature, please scroll to the bottom of the screen where the meeting controls are. Click on the interpretation icon, World, and select English as your language. If you're joining through the Zoom mobile app, cell phone, tablet, etc., please press the ellipsis, then interpretation, and then choose your language. Finally, click on mute original audio to not hear the Spanish low in the background. Headsets are available for interpretation. If you're in the meeting room, please check out a headset from the receptionist in the lobby. Buenas tardes, aviso por parte del intérprete. Para hacer uso del servicio de interpretación, favor de desplazarse a la parte inferior de la pantalla de Zoom, donde aparecen los controles. Haga clic en el icono de interpretación globo terráqueo y seleccione Spanish, español. Si está utilizando la aplicación móvil de Zoom, celular, tableta, etc., presione los puntos suspensivos, luego interpretación y luego el idioma. Si no desea escuchar el audio original en inglés en el fondo, por favor seleccione Mute Original Audio, silenciar audio original. Contamos con auriculares disponibles para el servicio de interpretación. Si se encuentra en la sala de reunión, favor de pedir auriculares con la recepcionista en el vestíbulo. Gracias. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the land that we call home. The tribal nations of the San Diego region have historically faced injustices. We acknowledge the harmony that existed between the land, nature, and its original peoples who have since endured displacement, persecution, and systemic oppression. We pay our respect to the unceded territory and homelands of the 18 tribal nations in our region, the most in any county in the United States. From four cultural groups, the Kumeyaay Degeno, the Loseño, the Cupeño, and the Kuya. This land has nourished, healed, protected, and embraced them for many generations in a relationship of balance and harmony. As members of the SANDAG community, we acknowledge this legacy. We aspire to learn from Indigenous traditional knowledge and experiences in undoing the injustices of the past. And now, if you'll please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. The flags have moved. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, Mr. Clerk, Michael Garcia, we need to confirm our quorum. If you'll please call the roll.
We do have a quorum, Chair.
We do. All right. We don't need to call the roll, I guess. All right, very good. Okay, let's move on to our non-agenda public and member comments. Michael, do we have any members of the public that wish to speak?
We do have one public comment on non-agenda, and that is Steve Mashew.
Stephen, you have 3 minutes. 2 minutes.
I'm Steve Mashew. I'm a retired Air Force colonel and 25-year Oceanside Beachfront HOA member. I've watched our beach shrink while we wait 10 to 20 years between partial temporary sand replenishments. To keep our beaches, we must regularly put sand back. Studies say it, retain or bypass, backfill, then replenish every 2 to 5 years. My ask, establish a permanent regional sand bypassing and dredging program for San Diego and Orange counties, a sand highway with home ported dredge and shore hookups at key choke points on a regular schedule, funded as infrastructure through the cities, county, state, Army Corps, and use multi-year contracts to keep the equipment here. I ask the Shoreline Preservation Working Group to endorse the concept, convene an interagency team to map routes, permits, governance, and operations, and return with a funding and implementation plan. Let's stop renting sand by the disaster and manage it as the lifeline it is. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
That concludes our non-agenda public comment, Chair.
Very good. Thank you. All right. I'd like to turn it over to Courtney Becker to provide an update on the RBSP3 Phase 1.
Thank you, Chair. So I just wanted to give an announcement that the Phase 1 report is completed. It's posted on our website, and I'll be sharing the link after today's meeting concludes. So thank you all for participating and helping get this Phase 1 report for this project completed. Thank you.
Thank you, Courtney. We're on item number 3.1 on the agenda, approval of the June 5th, 2025 meeting minutes. Michael, do we have any public comments on this item?
We do have, I'm sorry. We also had a public comment on non-agenda too, Chair. I'm sorry, the numbering was a little skewed.
Okay.
And that's on Gary Murphy.
Gary Murphy, resident of Luqadda. What I'm here for today is I know you guys will be talking about dredging and outside stuff with the Army Corps of Engineers. And so I came to take this time to get people to open up their minds of how much good sand we have in all the river mouths from Torrey Pines all the way north into Cardiff and into Carlsbad. We're not taking enough time to do the studies and looking at projects to clear this sand and move it in a northerly direction. If we do not move it in a northerly direction, whatever goes out below Del Mar goes sooner or later makes its way to Black's Canyon. This stuff's gold. This is sand gold. We've got to come up with a way, and I think at this time, I don't know if we can do it dredging, but we'd probably have to do it scoop project, which is trucking and other ways to get the sand to the north and make it a rotation thing. Always look at what you have here. We have beautiful sand, quality sand. Cardiff is coming down on Solana Beach. Solana Beach is coming down on Del Mar. These river mouths are getting full. This stuff is prime sand. Any surfer, any beach goer would pay anything to get there. So we need to look at an idea. And since we have the Army Corps of Engineers, we have dredgers, I think we should do studies of moving this sand in a rotating annually, studying it and moving it annually. And it's just something I think would be great because I hate to see this beautiful sand go straight into Black's Canyon and we lose it. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
Member comment?
Yes.
So I know we have a dredging item on the agenda, but Terry Gasterland, I'm the mayor of Del Mar, and I'm here today to remind all of us that the San Diego Lagoon river mouth is closing up. It's now, right now, about 18 inches deep. It's only 10 to 20 feet wide where there's flow. And SoCal Edison is charged because of songs through their mitigation to have to dredge the river mouth on a regular basis, but it's not often enough. So I want to echo what our first speaker from Oceanside said, that we do need some sort of year-round monitoring and response to be ready, because the sand, the 750,000 cubic yards of sand, which were placed on Fletcher Cove and rebuilt that beautiful beach, it is moving down. And if we can recycle the sand and get it back, as Gary Murphy from Encinitas told us about, get it back north, then we can get it back to Fletcher Cove. We can get it back to Encinitas. The further north we can put it in Encinitas, the better we are for recycling that sand and having it nourish all our North County beaches. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let's turn back to the agenda meeting minutes. Do we have any comments from the board, or I'll entertain a motion to approve that item?
I'll move that motion forward.
Thank you. Second, let's call for the vote.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Abstention from U.S. Navy. And that passes unanimously with the abstention from U.S. Navy.
Very good. Thank you. All right, we're on to item number 4.1, distribution of funds. The City of Encinitas' Public Recreational Beach Impact Mitigation Fund. The City of Encinitas is requesting that SPWG members recommend to the Regional Planning Committee to release their PRIBM account to fund their Grandview Street Beach Access Project. I'm going to turn that over to Courtney Becker and Ben Stryker from the City of Encinitas to explain the account and project activities.
Thank you. Sorry. It is a mouthful, the name of this account. Courtney Becker. I'm going to provide a little bit of the context and background information of what these accounts are, and then I'll be turning over to Ben to talk about the project and how it meets the eligibility criteria. So back in the late 1990s and early 2000s, SANDAG and the California Coastal Commission entered into a memorandum of agreement, or MOA, establishing a process for administering the Public Recreational Beach Impact Mitigation Fund and the Beach Sand Mitigation Fund. These funds consist of fees that are collected by the Commission to offset adverse impacts to public recreation and beach sand resulting from the construction of shoreline protection structures like seawalls or revetments. Each coastal city has its own interest-bearing account that is managed by SANDAG where these fees are deposited into. Coastal cities may request the use of these funds for projects that meet the eligibility criteria. The release process includes several steps, and the first being here what we're doing today, which is to ask that the Shoreline Preservation Working Group recommends that the Regional Planning Committee approve the release of funds. Once approved by the Regional Planning Committee, a letter is submitted to the California Coastal Commission's Executive Director authorizing the release. Once we receive that letter, then SANDAG is able to release the funds to the coastal city. Today's request involves the Public Recreational Beach Impact Mitigation Fund. So eligible projects include improving beach access, beach benches, viewing point stabilization, bike racks, and essentially anything that improves recreational use at the beach. So now with that background information, I will turn it over to Ben to talk about how this project meets that eligibility criteria.
Thank you, Courtney, and thank you for the opportunity to present this item this morning, afternoon, not sure what time it is. Ben Stryker, Senior Engineer with the City of Encinitas. We are looking at the Swami's Beach Access Project for the disbursement of these funds, as Courtney explained. So to get ourselves situated, this is at Swami's Beach, just south of the old Encinitas downtown corridor. Very famous, very popular surf spot in North County, San Diego. Consists of an existing parking lot and then this staircase down the bluff to the beach. The staircase itself was constructed back in 1990, so we're well over 30 years old at this point. Consists of 4 main segments. There's an at-grade concrete staircase, then a glulam beam bridge down to the 3-flight timber stair tower, and then finally a lower platform with a shower. Based on most recent inspection reports, the staircase is nearing the end of its life unless a major capital renovation is done. So where we're at with this project, we're in the very early stages of design, so we're still kind of scoping the exact construction activities, but at this time we're anticipating work to include upgrading the steel hardware. As you can see in that upper right photo, the hardware is getting pretty rusted out, so replacing it and also upgrading to a more robust stainless steel that's more appropriate for the marine environment. Select replacement of some of the structural timber elements compliant with building code and any coastal commission regulations on that. And then replacement of some parts of the concrete stairwell. There's some spalling and significant cracking occurring on the steps themselves. And finally, we'll be looking into targeted accessibility improvements. So, curb ramps and railing heights, making sure that we're making this whole area as accessible as possible to the public for future enjoyment. Getting into the budget here, at this time we're anticipating design to be around $150,000. Construction and our construction contingency will be in the $650,000 ballpark, and then about $100K for construction related inspections that need to occur. At this time, the city has already earmarked in the fiscal budget process $800,000 to this job, and the request we're respectfully submitting today would make up for the remainder of the budget there for a total of just over $900,000. And I'll just end here with some key boxes that we check in terms of project eligibility. So we've already completed that first step of the process. We at the local city council have a signed resolution formally requesting these funds that happened last month. This is a public shorefront recreational improvement job. And then, yeah, it's a large capital project with a fairly significant budget associated with the improvements. And finally, regardless of the funding here today, the project will be required to obtain a coastal development permit either through our city's local coastal program or directly from Coastal Commission. We kind of straddle the jurisdictional boundary on doing work right on the beach, but we will be obtaining a coastal permit through one of those two avenues. And with that, we are happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you again.
Thank you, Ben. Sure does look like it needs improvement. Do we have public comment on this item? Oh,
We have no public comment on this item, Chair.
all right, member comments?
I'll move
Sure, the
approval.
mayor does. Yeah.
I'll move approval.
Very good.
I'll second.
All right. Call for the vote.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Abstention from U.S. Navy. The motion passes unanimously with abstention from U.S. Navy.
Very good. Thank you so much. All right, let's move on to our highlight today, item number 4.2. This is the West Coast Beach Nourishment Dredging Panel discussion. And I think the team will be getting set up here. And I want to take a moment to thank all the panelists for traveling here today. They all going to fit? Yes, I'm going to turn this over to Keith Greer.
Thank you, Chair Becker, and good morning. It's nice to see a full house here at the Shoreline Preservation Working Group. So I'm really happy and excited for item number 5 in your agenda today. It's a discussion from a panel of experts on dredging. So why are we bringing dredging to you as a policy group here? And let me back up a little bit. SANDAG, as you know, has done 2 regional beach nourishment projects. We put 3.6 million cubic yards of sand on the beach. One in 2001 and the other one in 2012. We've also, as you heard, I've just created a new planning study for this 3rd regional beach sand project, which we hope to get funding for in this next year to continue on with that project. Regardless of when it goes forward, any kind of beach nourishment that we done in the region will be using a ocean-going hopper dredge. And that term may not be familiar to you, but you'll hear more about it very shortly. This is a dredge that gets the sand on the beach. So currently there are no hopper dredges home ported in California. So it adds additional time and cost to doing this beach nourishment. For example, in 2012, we had spent $9.3 million or 30% of the total project cost just to get the dredge out here. And since they're home ported in other locations, they have to come around from the East Coast or from the Gulf down to the West Coast, incurring extra time and delay. So the idea has been floated about why isn't the region, either SANDAG or Southern California or even California itself, just buy a dredge? If you're lacking the equipment, why not just buy it? So both the state of California and the county of Orange have independently explored this idea. And we have people today who have worked on that study who can talk about what resolved in those studies, what they found out. And it's a more complex issue than just buying a piece of equipment. You have to own it, you have to operate it, you have to maintain it. And there's lots of complexities here, which you'll hear about today. The Army Corps of Engineers also owns dredges, and they do a lot of work on the West Coast to make sure that the rivers and channels are open for navigation. The work the Army Corps of Engineers has, it's much more than they currently have hopper dredges for. So they actually contract out to go to dredging in these areas as well. So they have Army Corps as well has done a in partnership with the cities of Solana Beach and Encinitas and San Clemente have added additional sand down here through that dredging that they do as well. Finally, I'll mention that you might have read in the newspaper today, this last week, that there was a county grand jury in Orange County that had talked about the low sand issues or the railroad issues up there and how you maintain the rail service. And part of that, there was numerous conclusions in that report, but part of them was that a noteworthy conclusion that they lacked dredging companies serving the West Coast. So all this is kind of out there in terms of context for the discussion today. What we're going to do is we're going to have a short presentation, about 10 to 15 minutes. And after that, we're going to have some facilitated questions and answer amongst the dredging experts out here, the coastal engineers, the Army Corps, and the dredging industry itself, to give you kind of understanding and kind of raise everybody up in terms of what dredging consists of, why it's expensive, what could we do to make it more efficient and cost less. We'll then take a pause, we'll hear public comments, and then we'll open it up to the working group members for any questions you may have, comments, or directly with the panel members themselves. So if that sounds good, I'd like to actually introduce the panel who's going to be up there. Chris, you mind just standing up and giving a wave? Chris Webb from Moffitt Nichols is a principal coastal scientist, and Mr. Webb will be our facilitator today. He's got over 32 years in the region working on these type of issues. Chris has actually worked on our Regional Beach Sand 1 and Regional Beach Sand 2, and he's actually been working on the Regional Beach Sand 3 projects. So he's got a wealth of experience and understands the intricacies of this. So Chris, thank you very much for facilitating. We also have dredging industry experts here, and I would like to thank both of them for coming. Chuck is actually coming from Chuck Boussard from Louisiana, so thank you very much. Chuck is a senior vice president from Weeks Marine Incorporated. Chuck is responsible for overseeing the estimating department, the daily operations and coordination of their fleet logistics. He has 32 years in the dredging experience. So Chuck, thank you, and thank you for flying out from Louisiana. Also with us is Lynn Neatfield. She's a senior vice president from Great Lakes Dredge and Dock Company. And her role here has been, she actually worked on the SANDAG Regional Beach Sand Project 2, the 2012 one, and including up and down other beach nourishments along the East Coast. She's got over 30 years of experience in engineering operations and received her civil engineering degree from the University of Minnesota. Lynn, thank you for joining us from Texas. So thank you very much for that. We also have the Army Corps of Engineers, both in person today and also remote. Chuck Mesa is the Chief Coastal Engineers. Chuck has 37 years of experience in this area of coastal engineering projects up and down California. He has received his civil engineering degree from the state of California. And Chuck has been a known commodity for us up and down. He's out of the Los Angeles office. Chuck, thank you for being here today. We also have remotely joining us, and hopefully he can pop on his camera, Adam Merrick, who is the Army Corps' National Dredge Technical and Cost Subject Matter Expert. So Adam has been joining us from Portland, and he has done work for coastal engineering and beach nourishment, the US, Puerto Rico, and Brazil. He was actually on site during the sand placement of the 2012 beach nourishment project. So Adam, thank you for joining us. Finally, we have two more people representing our coastal engineers. These are folks that have done this work and are professional engineers from Moffitt Nichols. Alan Acorn, who's the vice president of Moffitt Nichols. Alan has over 45 years of extensive experience in civil works projects along the coast, and particularly focusing on dredging and other coastal engineering projects. He was formerly the president of the West Coast Dredging Association and has a slew of experience directly applicable to today's topic. Thank you, Alan, for joining us. And last but not least, John Feingold is the senior construction manager at Moffitt Nichols. John has over 17 years of experience in the industry. He spent his first part working for Manson Dredge Company, and then he joined Moffitt Nichols Engineering to provide expertise in this area. John has his Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering for the University of Florida. So I'm going to ask John to step up, or John, you don't actually step up. You can actually do it from there if you want to. Okay. John's going to give us a short 10 to 15-minute presentation just on dredging, so we understand the terms that the panels will be using and just kind of bring us all up to speed. After that, we'll turn it over for facilitated questions with Chris Webb. So John, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks, Keith. How's the sound? Okay? Cool. All right, we'll get going. We're going to start pretty slow here, some real basic dredge stuff. I'm not going to go into too much detail, just kind of introduce the different dredge types. We're going to talk about placement methods, borrow site design a little bit. Going to touch on environmental constraints, and then just talk about things we can do to make these jobs successful. With this presentation being geared towards, the work we're talking about here, which is beach nourishment here in Southern California. So the first dredge we're going to talk about is the hopper dredge, which is, as Keith mentioned, going to be the one we focus on. So trailing suction hopper dredge, you can see it has drag arms that reach the bottom. It uses centrifugal pumps to suck the sand off the bottom, and it fills up its hopper or a cargo hold full of sand. It then takes that sand wherever it needs to go with it. If you're just cleaning out a river, you'd likely bottom dump it. You place it. I'll go to the next slide for that. There's a couple things you could do with it. You can release it from the bottom, which is very common. You see rainbow. You don't really see that here in the U.S., but that's another thing they do, or they shoot it off the bow. That wouldn't work for these beaches because our waves break too far out. You couldn't get the ship close enough to the beach. Besides environmental issues, but what we're going to talk about today is pump out. So the way this works is the hopper dredge pulls up to a pipeline. The pipeline is set underneath the breaking waves, and there's a floating section that comes up where it hooks up. It hooks up to the pipeline, and it pumps out what it's holding. Next dredge we're going to talk about is the cutter suction dredge. People here are probably familiar with the cutter suction dredge because of the annual maintenance project in Oceanside. Cutter suction dredges mainly stay in one place. They stay hooked up to a pipeline all the time, and they're good for taking down large, thick banks of material. They use that mean looking thing, the cutter, to tear up the bottom, and then they also use centrifugal pumps to get the sand into the pipeline and to where it needs to go. Something I wanted to mention here is when you talk about a cutter suction dredge, you talk about the size by the diameter of the discharge pipe. So people that aren't in the industry hear something like a 30-inch dredge and think, well, that's not very big, but it's huge. So just to show you some different pictures of cutter suction dredges working and all the different things it can do. And these are some large cutter suction dredges. On the left is the HR Morris, most people will recognize from Oceanside, and on the right is a Weeks dredge. Looks like on the Gulf Coast somewhere. And the Weeks dredge is a 30-inch dredge, so you can see how big that thing is. And then something I wanted to point out is just the range of sizes of cutter suction dredges. They get really small as well as they get really big. And the small ones, 12-inch or smaller pipeline typically are truckable. And these dredges, mostly used for working inside harbors. And when you hear about a dredge that lives inside a harbor, it's something small like this, which is maybe like 1% the cost of ocean-going hopper dredge, what we're talking about, just to kind of clear that up. And the last type of dredging method is mechanical. Most of those you'll see here in the U.S. are clamshell dredges. There's also a couple backhoes, but they're pretty rare. These fill up a scow or a barge, and then that barge is towed to wherever it needs to go. Typically, they use bottom dumping, or they'll split the hull in half and it'll dump. You can also hydraulically unload them or mechanically offload them. Chuck Broussard sent this pretty cool picture of his hydraulic unloader that their company uses, so I thought that should make the slideshow. All right, we're going to get into borrow site design factors. One of the most critical things I want to talk about here today is the proximity to the placement site. When you're working with a hopper dredge, when you get past 20 miles, it's just not efficient anymore. So that's an issue. That's an area that we can work on here. This is SO5. This is off of Del Mar. And you can't read the soundings from here, but those are colored soundings that you could see if you were closer. Really important to just make sure that these borrow sites have enough material to feed the beach you want to feed. Important to make sure that there's somewhere the dredge can work, and that the dredge can reach the sand. And material quality, of course, that they have the material you want to see on your beach. This slide, what I really wanted to show here was there's a lot of sites here in San Diego County that need sand that don't have a good borrow site right now. And that is a huge thing we can work on. But like I said, over 20 miles, you're not really fishing anymore. The closer, the better. So we know there's lots of sand offshore, and the more sand we can find closer to the places where it needs to go, that's going to make this process a lot easier, a lot less expensive. And something to mention is there's currently offshore investigations starting in southern Orange County that's going to help with the San Clemente beach fill. Environmental constraints and weather. We all know in Southern California there's big waves, so that's a big thing to look at here. That's going to be something that makes these jobs hard, and there's nothing we can do about it. We're not getting rid of the waves. We just need big dredges that can handle it to work here. Mobilization, execution. What I wanted to focus on here is I think there's a little bit of a misconception sometimes, and people think, oh, well, I want a beach. All I need to do is get a dredge, and that's really not the case. There's so much other stuff that goes into it that people don't see necessarily, and that has to do with mobilizing the pipeline. So every beach that needs sand needs at least one subline that's going to have to get placed in the water. So typically what you do is you have a whole crew setting up this subline floating in a protected harbor, and then they'll tow it out on the day you want to sink it. And it's a huge operation. Crane barges, tugboats, specialized, dredge work boats, and it's, a big crew, and it's a big undertaking. So any discussion that involves, these jobs, you need to understand that it's not just the dredge. There's a lot of other stuff going on. And besides that, you have the shore crew. So they have, a whole fleet of bulldozers, front end loaders, oftentimes excavators, and a bunch of pipeline that they have to manage as well. So I just want to show here, there's a lot of other stuff going on. So now we're going to talk about the market. So in the past, we've redacted the bidders, but this is public knowledge, so you can figure it out. But basically, in 2012, there were 3 bidders, and in 2001, on that SANDAG job, there were 4 bidders. So historically, these SANDAG beach jobs are, well responded to by the industry. And here as well, this is the other big job that happens every year on the West Coast. This is the Army Corps' Columbia River job, also known as West Coast Hopper. And that brings a hopper dredge through the Panama Canal every year. And you can see there's basically 3 bidders that have been bidding that job for the past 10 years. If we went back further, we'd probably see other bidders as well. So we talked about all this stuff. This is just kind of in review. Just real important to look at what we're trying to do, and that determines what kind of dredge. We know it's going to be a hopper dredge is what we need. A cutter dredge can't work far enough in the ocean where these borrow sites are, and it can't pump that far. So, and then another thing to think about is the project frequency. So if the last SANDAG job was 2012, if these jobs started happening more frequently, it gets easier for contractors to bid them. All of a sudden, if they're happening on a regular basis, all of a sudden these contractors are storing pipe here, and it's just everything gets easier. Things you can do to help control cost. Early engagement with permit agencies with SANDAG has done a wonderful job of. Identify and permit nearby borrow sources. We talked about that. That's a definite area of improvement that'll help make this job cheaper. Early contractor engagement, understanding market and schedule constraints, and that kind of lends to the next bullet, which is allowing flexibility. The more flexibility you have in your schedule, that makes it a lot easier. Specifically for hopper dredges, they're always tied to a really tight schedule because they have to keep working to survive. So the more flexibility you can offer in your project, that's going to make it a lot cheaper, and more people can respond to it. And again, bid early allows time for planning, allows flexibility. Any questions?
Hey, John, I think we can probably ask those questions at the end. So
Okay.
if I could ask Chris Webb to come on up. Well, we have about half an hour of questions and answers for questions that we've kind of prepared that you might be interested in. And then Chris will facilitate those questions and ask one of the panel members or more to address those. And at the end, then we'll be opening it up for the rest of the panel to talk about those questions and answers. So Chris, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Keith, and working group. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for allowing us to take your time and try to bring some information to light that you may very well be highly interested in, and hopefully this will provide some answers. And we're looking forward to questions from you as well. So with that, we've got approximately 22 questions, and I heard Keith say 30 minutes, but he told me 35. So I have a minute and a half per question. Minute and a half per question and answer. So we're going to buzz right through this, and we're going to start with the dredging industry representatives that are here today. Lynn and Chuck, thank you for coming. I know you both had to travel. We're gonna let Lynn kick it off, all right, with question number one, but I'm sure you can both provide input on this if you need to do that. Question number one, what are the most efficient types of dredges used for beach nourishment work?
Thank you, Chris. I think John summed up a lot of the points in his presentation, but hopper and hydraulic dredges are the most efficient. It really depends on a number of factors, distance to the borrow area, from the beach, and sea conditions all come into play. I think hoppers have made a lot of progress over the last few years. We've gotten larger hoppers that can carry more sand to the beach. So distance is a little bit less of a problem for hoppers than it was several years ago. But if you're building a beach, those are the two types of dredges you'd be using.
Okay, that's a minute and a half. So we're going to move on to question number two. Chuck, you'll get your chance. How about this one? Chuck, are dredges used for port and harbor dredging different than those used for beach nourishment? Such as, you know, we understand the hopper, but within more enclosed waters is probably a different type of equipment. Can you elaborate?
So yeah, most of the port operations are calm water in nature, and it really depends on the material type that you're dredging and where the material goes. So a lot of inlets and stuff like that on the East Coast, per se, you can use a hydraulic dredge to dig the inlet and then pump to the near shore. Just depends on the size of the inlet and sea conditions in the inlet. Clamshell dredges or another as clamshell or mechanical dredges, they're basically more or less just a retrieve and transport and dump the material offshore. So you don't have any beach reclamation projects per se with clamshell dredges. When it comes to a hopper dredge, the hopper dredges, when it facilitates ports and harbors, they mostly do the entrance channels of the harbors that are in rougher sea conditions, and then either use that material beneficially to put on the beach or to dump it offshore. So the size varies from every port and every inlet, but the shallower the port and the further inland the port is, the smaller the vessels that are required to perform the dredging.
So it's a different type of equipment.
Yes.
And it's typically smaller, and it's got to be sitting in calm water as opposed to more exposed ocean conditions.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Question number three. We'll go back to Lynn with this one. What is the rough cost of buying a new hopper dredge? Quote, mentioned in the Jones Act. And I'm not sure what the Jones Act is, but I'm sure it's a restriction of some sort.
Yes, the Jones Act requires that all dredges that operate in the U.S. are built in the U.S. So that restricts where you can build your vessels and dry dock your vessels generally. But I mean, I've heard a few different ranges mentioned, like 150 million to 250 million. The Corps of Engineers is currently building a 6,000 cubic yard capacity hopper dredge. And I believe the cost on that was at 257 million. GLDD has recently renewed their fleet, their hopper fleet, since 2017. GLDD has added 3 new hopper dredges to their fleet. All these dredges are Jones Act compliant, and all their engines meet the requirements to allow us to dredge in Southern California, which was a bit of an impediment prior to us building these new dredges. So, I'm sorry?
And
air quality, yes.
And GLDD stands for Great Lakes Dredging and Dock Company.
Yes.
That's the acronym. More to the answer, or is that it?
That's about it.
Yeah,
Item number-
I'll add to that. So Weeks Marine has invested in new hopper dredges in their fleet since 2017, which meet the tier requirements for the EPA and the California emissions.
Can you speak up just a little bit, Chuck? into the mic?
Sorry, both of those vessels were in excess of $100 million apiece.
Okay.
So just to add to it.
Chunk of change. So question number 4, we'll go to you directly to you, Chuck. What are the typical costs to operate and maintain a hopper dredge, considering fuel, replacement of parts, crew, whatever?
I got the easy one. Anyway, ladies first always. At the end of the day, it varies on the plant that you have, the acquisition cost of the vessel. But these, to elaborate more on the crew, these are licensed maritime individuals that are all, you know, very sought after in the industry, not only in the dredging industry, but in the oil field, the Gulf Coast market, and shipping and transportation industries as well. So if you can't go to a union hall and hire a dredge crew. We keep our dredge crews on staff 365 days a year. If the dredge shuts down or goes to shipyard, we still maintain and pay for that crew the entire year so they can manage and operate the vessel. As far as fuel consumption, you know, we kind of burn a lot of fuel sometimes. I guess, you know, anywhere from 5 to maybe 10,000 gallons a day, depending on the dredge vessel themselves. And then, of course, it all comes down to how much does it cost to maintain the vessel? The vessels have to go to dry dock let's just call it every 2.5 years. And those are extensive financial hits where the ships are actually dry docked, just like the Navy ships around here. Dry dock, maintained, Coast Guard approved, and then we go from there. So, but really the driver is the acquisition costs, what it costs you to run it, and then how much utilization out of that vessel you can get. The more utilization you can get out of your vessel, the lower daily cost you can have. So if you have a high cost vessel that doesn't work a lot, then your daily costs, that project that it does, that will add additional cost.
So Chuck, can I intervene for a
Yes.
second? Can you give us a ballpark for the cost to operate a hopper and maintain it for a year? Is it just high versus $1 million, $2 million?
I think we all have our independent cost basis that we don't want to really,
Okay.
unfold, but it's a lot.
It's significant. Okay, well, I'll go with that. I can't twist your arm to give me a specific answer, and that's
I
okay.
would probably add just roughly owning the cost to purchase a dredge is about 25% of the cost. All the other costs really add up to quite a bit.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
you also need a full-time staff to support that vessel, to purchase equipment for that vessel. You need a lot of other people making sure that the vessel's running at optimum production.
Lynn?
It's expensive.
It's okay. All right. We get the drift. Why is mobilization so expensive, Lynn, since you've got the floor? And is there anything that can be done to lower those costs?
Okay. I think as John again described in his presentation, it's a lot of pipeline. Especially out here on the West Coast. If you don't have the pipeline out here, you have to either tow it around or build it on the West Coast. So you do have that initial hit when you perform a beach project on the West Coast if you don't have the inventory. It's high risk putting that pipeline together and placing it on the beach. It's a high risk activity and it requires trained people, experienced people to do the work safely. And it requires a lot of support vessels, tugboats, derrick barges, anchor barges. It's not as simple as just going out there for a day. It usually takes about 30 days to ramp up and prepare for a dredge to arrive.
Where's it coming from?
The dredge
Yeah.
depends on where it is. The job before, typically the East Coast, and it's about 21 days to sail it around, depending on where it originates from on the East Coast.
Okay. And the transit from East Coast through the Panama Canal can add to the cost, I assume.
Correct.
Okay.
There are Panama Canal fees and sometimes delays.
Okay. Let me go to the next question. This is for Chuck. With the previous regional beach sand projects, there were issues with getting the dredge here on time. Why is there a recurring issue with arriving to the West Coast for a nourishment project? And what are some of the factors that contribute to the delaying of a dredge arriving here?
So we always like to ask for completion dates and not arrival dates. So when we're looking at a job, we have an existing backlog. We're always trying to work these vessels and occupy them all the time. So a longer lead time bid would help, get a dredge there potentially sooner. So the lateness of the dredge is somewhat irrelevant because every dredge has different capabilities and it's all about the final completion of the contract. So the more flexibility you give someone on the front end, the more competition you'll have and the lower prices that you could receive for your job.
Okay, does it have anything to do with work being done that hasn't been completed yet? Maybe on the East Coast, it needs to be completed before the dredge can unhook and come this way?
So we have constraints on environmental windows, when we can actually operate our hopper dredges. A lot of times the environmental windows, preclude the dredges from working, let's just say in the summertime, due to turtle nesting mostly and some birds. So at the end of the day, there is a large amount of work that happens in the wintertime on the East Coast, which if you want to follow suit, all you have to do is make it summertime performance on the West Coast to mitigate that,
So the last question in your section, Lynn, you get to handle this one. It's been mentioned that the West Coast does not have enough projects to attract dredging companies. What scale and frequency of projects would make the region more appealing to dredging contractors?
I think that a annual or semi-regular beach project in SANDAG, the industry would know it was coming. We could somewhat plan for it, and know it's out there. I'd also say, there is the West Coast hopper job that the Corps of Engineers puts out that, if it can be done in conjunction to work with that project, that would be helpful. And the bigger the job, the more attention it's going to get.
Like a big as in how many? 6 million?
6 million cubic yards, I think you would get the attention of every dredging contractor that is capable of the work.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
So I'll add to that. So what that increase
We're tight on time.
I know what that increase in that volume does, it lowers your overall unit cost because you're projecting that mobilization cost over a higher unit, which lowers the overall unit price of the job. So the bigger the job, the cheaper it will be.
Thank you, Chuck. I appreciate that elaboration. So speaking of Chucks, now we're going to go to the Corps of Engineers. I don't know when the last time was that you guys had to be on a panel and answer some questions, but we're excited to be able to ask you some. And Chuck, I think you brought up the point earlier to us about the Army Corps of Engineers dredge competition may affect the desire or willingness to mobilize for dredging contractors. Do you recall that? And if so, could you elaborate on that just a little bit?
So the question involves the fact that the Corps of Engineers has a dredging fleet.
And you'll have to speak up a little.
The question involves the fact that the Corps of Engineers has a dredging fleet. That question is, my colleague Adam Mammer can address that specifically. However, our dredging fleet is relatively small compared to industry and it's at maximum capacity. So generally speaking, we keep our dredging fleet going full time. And trying not to hinder industry. So it's very complex interplay where our dredges are working and can work and are allowed to work. So there's a lot that the Corps of Engineers has to consider before we'll use our own fleet.
Okay, thank you, Chuck. So the question that I'd like to ask the Corps first is, what type of dredging does the Army Corps do along the West Coast?
I'll take that one first. In Southern California, in the Los Angeles district, we have 14 harbors. We have 11 small craft harbors and 3 deep draft harbors. And we do a fair amount of mechanical dredging because the harbors are relatively small, the areas are small, and they lend themselves to mechanical dredge. So the dredge can't move around. It's very tight, confined spaces.
Is that a clamshell? Is that
That's a clamshell. Yes, I'm sorry. Clamshell. Known as mechanical dredge, but specifically clamshell dredge. So we do a fair amount of mechanical dredging. In other cases where if the volume is large enough, we can use a hydraulic cutter head dredge. Those tend to be larger and they require larger volume. And so we do have a couple of our projects that do use a hydraulic cutter head dredge. We have one beach fill project that uses a cutter head dredge. That's our Surfside Sunset project. It has traditionally. The third aspect is we now have 3 projects that are going to lend themselves to hopper dredge. The Surfside Sunset, we have over the last 50 years, we've used all the easily available sediments, and the borrow site's getting further away. So at some point, we're going to get to where we will need a hopper dredge. In the San Clemente and Encinitas Solana Beach project, we use a hopper dredge for that. Going north, San Francisco district, most of the projects are generally within San Francisco Bay, so it lends themselves to mechanical clamshell dredging. In the Northern California, on their small craft harbors, they have relatively long reaches, so they do use hopper dredges for those. And going up into Oregon, they're mostly known for Columbia River dredging, which involves a hopper dredge, and some of their smaller harbors, they do use a hopper dredge or mechanical dredging as well. And
Can I jump in?
yes, sir.
So you've mentioned the different types of dredges, and I don't mean to just cut off your answer, but you've been very elaborate. I appreciate that. Can you tell us how many hopper dredges the Corps owns, and can any of them be used for beach nourishment?
I'm going to defer that question to Adam.
Sure. Thanks, Chuck. The Army Corps has 4 dredges, or 4 hopper dredges that they operate. None of them can be used for beach nourishment. Only one of them has pump ashore capability, which is the McFarland in Philadelphia, and they only pump into a disposal facility, a placement facility right outside the Philadelphia airport.
So none of them can pump sand up onto the beach. They bottom dump. Is that what they do?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, can they be modified in some way to become beach nourishment worthy? And pump off?
Not the current dredges. I'm not sure about the McFarland's specifications to know what kind of horsepower they have to be able to pump longer distances that are usually required for beach placement. But part of that also entails having the pipeline available and the knowledge and crewing to do the land side of the beach placement as well, which the Army Corps doesn't currently have.
Okay. Do you have East Coast dredges that can be brought to the West Coast and used for West Coast work?
Yes, but with an asterisk. The dredges that are on the east and west coast, so we have 2 on the west coast, the Aquina and the Essayance. They operate out of the Portland district, primarily in the Columbia River, but also do a little more work along the west coast at other ports. And then there's 2 dredges in the Gulf and on the east coast. They tend to stay on their own sides unless there's some extenuating circumstance, usually a natural disaster, where there's just a large amount of dredging needed. That would be the special case where the dredge might be brought around the Panama Canal and operate on the opposite coast.
So did you say there's 2 on the Gulf and 2 on the East Coast?
2 total on the East Coast. I'm sorry, 1 in the Gulf, 1 on the East Coast. Okay. McFarland and the Wheeler. McFarland's in Philadelphia, Wheeler's in the Gulf Coast.
Okay, so we cannot declare our shoreline a disaster and an emergency with its.
No, even if we could, none of them would have the capability to pump out.
Have you ever considered purchasing a dredge for Southern California specifically?
Yeah, I can answer that. Yes, we have actually. In the middle 1990s, we did a feasibility study for Santa Barbara Harbor, and the results came back that we did recommend purchasing a dredge. However, our feasibility study showed that the benefits were barely positive. In the end, for many reasons, the city ended up not purchasing the dredge. Today, in 2025, I can't see a study where the benefits become positive that a city would actually want to purchase their own dredge. So, yeah.
Okay. We're going to segue to the contract up north at Columbia River. Why does the Corps choose to do an annual dredging contract for the Columbia River instead of using its own dredges?
We do both, actually. The season on the Columbia River is so short and there's so much material to move that we have kind of all hands on deck, so to speak. So we're only able to dredge after the freshet, which is when the large flows come down the Columbia River. We're only able to dredge after that and during certain environmental windows from around midsummer through, I'd say, early fall. And that's because conditions, particularly in the mouth of the Columbia River, degrade in the fall. So during that short window, we usually have 3 million cubic yards that need to be moved just from industry, in addition to a few million cubic yards that are moved by our core dredges. Additionally, we have some side channels on the Columbia River and local ports that use clamshell dredges. And there's also a 30-inch cutter that works on the Columbia River to move material. So there's a lot of material movement during that summer season.
Okay. Question number 7 for the Corps. Chuck, this is, I think, for you, and you may have even come up with it. After a dredge is mobilized for a first Army Corps of Engineer project, what prevents the Corps from utilizing the same dredge for a subsequent Corps of Engineers project?
That's an easy response. It's against federal law. Our federal fiscal law require, when we receive an appropriation, we are only allowed to use it for the dredging that particular project only, and we cannot use it on another project just because we feel like it. So it's a simple question you ask, but it is a matter of federal fiscal law.
Okay, can an executive order be issued to change that?
It would take an act of Congress. The
Takes an
executive
act-
order could not change that, yes.
I speak in jest. Number 8, second to last question, by the way, we're making our way through this pretty quick. The Corps of Engineers has referred to the term piggybacking as a method to reduce dredge mobilization costs for non-Army Corps of Engineers projects. Can you explain that just a little bit so we understand it better? And how can
Yeah.
it be implemented? And
I can
has
do
it been done recently?
The answer is yes, it can. Piggybacking refers to the fact that if the Corps of Engineers has a dredging contract, can we, a city, also utilize that particular dredge while it's here? The answer is yes. And however, it requires that you as a city, well, first of all, let me back up. We have our dredging needs are known, are forecast several years in advance. So we know which harbors are going to be dredged when typically. And therefore, if a city wants to utilize a contract, it essentially requires you to have an agreement with the federal government. That process, we call it contributed funds. That process takes on order of 2 years. The legal agreement between our Office of Counsel is at least a year, and again, another year on top of that. So the city would have to be thinking at least a couple years out and work to have an agreement in place. So when our dredging contract goes up, you can utilize that dredge as well. The last time it's happened was, I think it was in 2010. We were dredging Anaheim Bay in Northern Orange County, and the city of Seal Beach wanted to use that dredge for a small project on Seal Beach, which they did. But I will caution you, you are on the hook for your own engineering design, your own environmental permitting, and everything else that comes along with it. So it can be done, but it's not trivial.
Okay, thank you, Chuck. We were a part of that together. I recall that project. Last question for the Corps. This could be either one of you, so fight for it. How does an agency get federal funding for nourishment projects in the future from the Corps if they're not part of a Corps project now?
Adam, I'll take that. That's a long process. It requires first of all, the city to express a need, and then get Congress to authorize what we call a feasibility study. And we will go through a fairly long exhaustive study, both engineering and an economic evaluation to determine whether it is economically justifiable or not. On the assumption that it is justifiable, then you receive a congressional authorization. And then we'll do the second phase, which is engineering design. And then after the completion of that, we will seek construction funds. So traditionally, it has been a very, very long process on order of 10 or 15 years. However, in the last less than 10 years, Congress passed the law that is directing us to complete our feasibility studies in under 3 years. So that's a good thing. However, the rules for economic justification haven't changed. So we have not had a new authorization since our Encinitas-Solana project, which was authorized in 2016, I think. So they're hard to get, but they can be done. And they are good for 50 years typically.
Okay, so Chuck, it takes time, it takes money.
It takes time and
It
money.
takes commitment, but it can be good if it turns out to work out. Now, we have questions for the engineers. Now, these guys work with me, but I'm not going to be nice to them. So it doesn't matter how well I know them. So you're on the hook, guys. Question number 1. Your firm has investigated the issue of buying a dredge for future nourishment for both the state of California and Orange County. What were the conclusions of those reports?
Yes,
Who wants to try first?
Happy to do that, Chris. Thank you. There's a couple that were done for the county and for the boating waterways. One was for actually beach nourishment to purchase a hopper dredge. And they said that the results were, is if you could get an annual contract of a minimum of 350,000 cubic yards with funding to go along with it, it might barely work. But that means, funding that would need to be done. And I don't know if the costs now for labor and fuel would still make that work in today's market. So it's a pretty marginal effort for that possibility. In the end, since it's probably unlikely that we get that much quantity and that much dollars, it's unlikely. The other was for a small, 5.5? 3.5 million. Yeah, 3.5 million. Okay. And then the other was for a small dredge, cutter suction dredge that would just be for a harbor, and that would not work for a beach nourishment. And that one, again, if there was enough quantity and enough funding, it might work just barely, but likely, again, probably not. And we also worked on that Santa Barbara study that Chuck was looking at. And again, although that came up barely positive, turns out that that was not. The only dredge I know that's privately owned on the West Coast that's working right now is in the Santa Cruz Harbor. And they have several times a year maintenance dredging that they do with some funding that comes from the feds that helps support that. But again, that's a protected area with a small amount of dredging that happens very frequently. Over.
Okay. I'm glad you said over because I was going to make you be over. Question number 2. So to summarize, there's not enough demand, not enough nourishment demand to buy a dredge for the state of California. However, the county of Orange received a yes. There's enough small dredging demand for you guys to link together and buy a dredge. They still haven't done it yet, but that's. Is beach nourishment done more frequently along the East Coast, John? And if so, why? And what factors contribute to this?
Well, there's more dredging on the Gulf and East Coast in general. And mainly it's the environmental reason is there's more rivers, right? So there's.
Speak up and into the mic.
Oh, can you guys not hear me? Okay, here we go. There's more navigable rivers on the East and Gulf Coast, which is why there's more dredging. There's also more beach renourishment as well, I would say. And I'm guessing that's a function of there being more people that live on eroding beaches. But you guys are welcome to give me your theories.
No. We're not going to open up to the rest of the panel. Well, hold on. I take it back. Go ahead. Free form it, but be short. Be brief, Chuck.
The East Coast has many, many more rivers and inlets, and most of this dredging occurs at inlets, and we don't have that many inlets. So it's a big disparity, and that's just the national geography of the East Coast versus the West Coast.
And they have hurricane problems that come through and cause the need to become an emergency, right? Okay. Understanding that, are there more constraints impacting West Coast dredging versus East Coast dredging? For example, there's marine protected areas on the West Coast. Do they have them on the East Coast?
Yeah, so for the East Coast, one of the biggest drivers is the turtle window, where they can really only dredge between in the winter months from April to December through April, and those periods of time really concentrate the beach nourishment to that very small window. So they have to get all that dredging done in that one small area. Whereas on the West Coast, although we do have grunion and we do have some marine protected areas, we have been able to get work around those restraints either by getting passages or exceptions to allow to operate in those regions. So a lot less of constraints. Over.
Okay, and I know the air quality The air quality requirement on the East Coast on the West Coast, excuse me, for equipment has been a constraint in the past, but everybody's meeting that now, it appears.
Yeah.
Okay. So now we're down to the last three questions, and these are the really important ones, and they're for all these folks, okay? Not just any specific call out. Question number one, a recent Orange County grand jury report examined the ongoing railroad disruption in the city of San Clemente due to beach erosion and bluff collapse. Of the many results concluded in the report, one noteworthy conclusion was the lack of dredging companies serving the West Coast. What do you think of the findings of the grand jury report? Who wants to go first? Alan Alcorn.
Yeah,
Okay.
be happy to. The grand jury report basically mentioned that there was only one dredging company that could service the West Coast. And as John's presentation just mentioned, for the last SANDAG projects, we've had 3 to 4 bidders. Same with the West Coast dredging. So we do have much more dredging capability in the industry. And if the job is there that's worthwhile, you'll get many more bidders. So I think that was probably just an oversight on the jury. Over.
So there are multiple companies that have hopper dredges that can do the work of offshore beach nourishment. About how many of them are there? There's Great Lakes, there's Manson, there's Dutra, there's Weeks, there's Callum Marine. Am I forgetting anybody?
It's pretty much the first 4.
A handful? Okay. All right. So we have multiple bidders. Number 2, you have the opportunity to address the elected officials from all of San Diego coastal cities. What a privilege. What would you like them to know about the opportunity and or challenges related to dredging for beach nourishment? Who wants to take it? Oh, Mr. Mesa, you go, sir.
The first thing I would say to the elected officials is you have to ask. The Corps of Engineers is not going to come to you and offer to place a beachville at Pacific Beach. You have to ask us. And before you do that, you should know that you're in for a long slog. It's difficult. It's a tough process to work with the Corps of Engineers and Congress. And it can be very frustrating. But if you're serious about it, then you got to ask. Because if you don't ask, the answer is no. So that's what I would say.
Okay, Mr. Alcorn, you want to?
Yeah, I did just want to mention that there has been a lot of discussion about purchasing a dredge. As Lynn and Chuck and crew just mentioned to you. Okay.
Want to jump ahead to that?
Might as well. Buying it and operating a dredge is a huge endeavor. It's not like getting a backhoe in your public works department that you can park and use, once in a while. This is something that has to be used frequently, has to be serviced frequently, has special labor concerns, has special equipment that goes along with it. You can't even go down to Home Depot and buy a part from that. You have to send for it, and it might take you months to get it if it breaks. You have to have dedicated people in your organization that manage the organization, funding and purchasing and labor. So it's a very dramatic purchase that would be done. In SANDAG's instance, right now that infrastructure is not there. I'm not sure if it could be, but it isn't there now, and I would highly recommend against it. Over.
Thank you, Alan. So there's one last answer that we'd like to give you, and it was for the prior question about what would we like you to know about the challenges for beach nourishment, and they were nice enough to give me the answers, so I'm going to answer this last question. Okay, this is putting words in their mouths. A, the SANDAG beach nourishment events tend to be spaced out over several years, making the cost of dredge upkeep and labor consistency very challenging. More frequent work could offset this challenge. Okay, do it more often. B, the multiple SANDAG beach nourishment sites require setting up areas in advance with multiple pipelines. Fewer and larger receiver sites could be more cost effective. C, many of the borrow sites are located a long distance from the placement sites, which makes the dredging very inefficient. Closer proximity of dredge and placement sites could also be more cost effective. And finally, many of the borrow sites are located in fairly deep water with shapes inefficient for hopper dredge operations. They need to be long boxes, perpendicular to shore. Simplification of the borrow side outlines and locating them closer to shore, but still outside of the closure depth or sand transport depth, so it doesn't rob the beach, could be a benefit. So with that, we have gone through all the questions. Good job, panel. And this panel is complete. Now, I think it's time for staff to open it up to the rest of the panel.
I'll turn it over to the clerk to see if there's any public comments, and then we'll turn it over to the board members to ask if there's any comments.
Oh, there's a slip over there. You can go ahead and head to the podium and announce your name.
Good afternoon. My name is Ellen Burr. I consider myself a citizen representative of the San Alejo Lagoon environs. What I've heard here this afternoon so far seems like there needs to be a regular schedule, but there's been a lot of talk about sand replenishment. I just want the stuff moved out of the mouth of the lagoon because the people, the wildlife, the plants inside are being suffocated and poisoned to death. So San Alejo Lagoon just finally this past weekend finished a very long dredging project. I'm not sure what all was used to accomplish it. Many more equipments and days than they had anticipated, I think. But already it's starting to fill up at the mouth. So I would like to know what the actual process is to decide how frequently you need to dredge a mouth opening and how you are deciding if the quality of sand or soil you are dredging is appropriate for where you are placing it. Because I think there's lots of questions there. And finally, I don't know about the Jones Act, but this project in San Alejo was delayed for months, waiting on a pipe coming from China. So I don't know how many parts it takes to make a whole, but I would just say you need to find out more about the little lagoons that we all have. There's at least 4 off the top of my head, where it's not open and shut, that we really need to be concerned just about beach replenishment. A lot of the world has pebbly beaches. Thank you.
Thank you. We have one public comment online, Marco Espinosa. Marco, you have 2 minutes.
Hello, good afternoon, Marco Espinosa. In terms of dredging, sand replacement, all that, I remember a couple months ago, not too long ago. Anyway, there was someone who spoke, who's seated at the table, so either board member or whatnot, and he said that unless we just give everything back to the kumiai, because we've already, as human, we've altered the environment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So now it's just about preserving what we've done thus far. And so I am totally for keeping the ecosystem sustainable, while at the same time maintaining the economy and our coastline and the beauty that is our county, because San Diego really is a great place. It's naturally beautiful even by itself. Would have been amazing to see it on the ship that Cabrillo sailed into the bay and just see it in its natural state. I love looking at our land, I really do. If anyone's ever been to Portugal, I've been to Lisbon, Portugal one time, and I can tell you the moment I got there, I realized that what the sailors on the ship that sailed on the west coast from Mexico all the way up, what they saw when they got to California, when they got to San Diego, they saw home. The land looks so much like the Western Iberian Peninsula. So anyways, just going on my own little rant about my love of the land, our land, home. Okay, thank you very much, and have a nice day. I yield back to the chair.
That
Thank
concludes
you.
our public comment on this item, Chair.
Thank you, Michael. So it sounds like what the public has commented on, there's a difference between those types of dredging in the lagoons and the beach nourishment. And I don't know if that's another day, another discussion, or if there's anything that you can straighten out for us, Keith, or.
I'm actually going to ask Chris Webb to talk to that issue because he's been working with SANDAG and the Nature Collective on this specific issue. And Chris, maybe you should also mention the meeting with the lagoon managers on regards to their concerns of beach nourishment.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that, Mr. Greer. My name is Chris Webb. I work with Moffett and Nickel, and I was the project manager for the San Alejo Lagoon Restoration Project for the engineering team. And so we have insight about it. And so I listened to the comment, and what I know is that it was done with a hydraulic cutter head suction dredge that was relatively small. I think it was 10-inch pipe diameter that came from the Gulf, and it was new and needed to be outfitted with some equipment, and it took far longer to have the equipment delivered and assembled onto the dredge than was expected by the contractor. So they started very, very late. They intended to start in January and they started in June. And it took about 6 weeks. They cleared everything from approximately the Nature Center down to west of the railroad bridge to near the Plastino building, which is one of the two buildings that's on the Pacific Coast Highway side of the wetland. And then they could go no further because it's too shallow. So they demobilized over the last month. And the Nature Collective brought in their earthwork contractor who came in from the west under Highway 101 bridge and cleared out the remainder of the material from that bridge into toward the railroad bridge to the office buildings. It's clear now. And I had a discussion with them this morning. And what they indicated was that it is flushing vigorously. The inlet is large enough in terms of its cross-sectional area that it's the same size right now as it was post-restoration in 2020. So it's working at full capacity right now. And it's not refilling rapidly because they measure it once a week. And he just told me they just did it the other day, and it's a large cross-section. So it's functioning as planned right at this moment, which is a very positive thing. They dredge it once a year with an earth mover, and they dredge from Highway 101 back toward the railroad bridge, and they don't get all the way to the railroad bridge. They take about 30,000 cubic yards of sand out back toward the Kraken and Plastino building, if you know where those two landmarks are. Once sand gets to the railroad bridge, they cannot get it. And that was the problem in the past, is sand was able to get to the railroad bridge and get upstream of the railroad bridge, and there was no way to go get it except bringing in a hydraulic cutter head suction dredge from somewhere else. That's basically the point. The sand was high quality, so it was pumped out onto the beach, and it matches the beach. We took samples, had grain size tests done, and it is perfectly uniform because it came from the beach. So that was the right place to put it. Mr. Greer, is there anything else that you didn't need from that answer?
If I could just, so it sounds like these beach nourishment projects have to go hand in hand with knowing that the lagoon might be affected. So I
Absolutely.
think that's the thing that we want to make sure we make that connection and have the money and have the timing work out perfectly if we could. Because, and also maybe getting the information better out to the public, because I know a lot of people walk the lagoon and didn't know what was happening. And so just being transparent about it is much more helpful so that everybody knows, you know, we're not waiting on the piece from China or whatever, you know, let's just get the right information out, because these are all good things for our cities. You know, these are good projects, and we just want to make sure that they don't become negative for no reason. So thank you.
Very correct.
Okay. Mayor Ehlers.
If I can, Bruce Ehlers, Mayor of Encinitas. Question, I'm just reading the report about the dredging. It sounds like 50,000 cubic yards were the hopper dredger, or the cutter dredger, the 10-inch, and about 17,000 cubic yards were taken through conventional equipment approach and put on the. Will that be about the same amount you would expect next year? You said it's going to be an annual requirement. I'm trying to get an idea of, you know, as we talk about capacities and what the actual needs are, is that typical of what you would expect for that one inlet, one lagoon? annually?
It's more than the annual. The annual is predicted at 40,000 cubic yards per year. That was the engineering that was done up front, quantified it as that's the annual requirement. There was a 1 year missed in the annual maintenance, which caused the sand to get farther upstream and become a larger quantity that needed to be removed this year. Typically, they've removed 25,000 cubic yards every year in the past, roughly 25,000. We predicted they need to probably remove between 40 to possibly 45,000 every year. So their maintenance requirement has increased and needs to be factored in.
And do you have any understanding on why that maintenance required
Absolutely.
increase? Okay.
Absolutely. Because of the removal of sediment from the lagoon, there was a larger volume of water allowed to enter into the lagoon now. There's less sediment in the lagoon and more room for water. That's called the tidal prism. It's a seawater volume that fills the lagoon during every rising tide, fills it during a high tide, and then it drains out of the lagoon during a dropping tide and drains out at low tide. So the volume of water that enters in and drains out on average is called the tidal prism. That tidal prism was increased significantly by the restoration project, and it draws in more sand from the beach as more water is drawn in during an incoming tide cycle. It's just the sand and water come in together. And if more water comes in, more sand comes in. The sand tends to drop out. It drops out in the entrance channel between the 101 bridge and the railroad bridge if there's room to drop out. If there's no room and it's filled with sediment, it'll keep traveling all the way upstream till there's room to drop out, which happened to be upstream of the rail bridge eventually. So the idea is to never let that happen again.
And last question would be, that's one lagoon. There are how many lagoons up and down North County? Would they all be roughly that same order of magnitude of annual required dredging, or does it vary from almost nothing to maybe even more?
It's variable, and I may look to Dr. Flick to help us with this answer, but Bataquitos Lagoon has an annual removal quantity that's larger than San Alejo by at least a factor of 2, potentially a factor of 3 or 4. So Bataquitos Lagoon is probably the largest one. Agua Hedionda Lagoon also has an annual maintenance dredging requirement. I don't remember what that number is. Ron, do you know?
But it's smaller. I think the general answer to the lagoon maintenance issues has to do mostly, I think, with the configuration of the entrance. I mean, you look at San Alejo, it's got this snake. The entrance isn't where it's supposed to be naturally. So you've got this big long channel. San Dieguito is similar, except it's a different direction. It goes almost straight in rather than serpentine. And Agua Hedionda's got it's got outflow only in one of them. And it's got jetties to, help keep the sand from getting into the lagoon to the extent that it would otherwise. So I think that's mostly the main differences. And you look at some of the bigger lagoons, harbors like Mission Bay, it's got those gigantic entrance channels, much bigger tidal prism, so much less maintenance. And San Diego Bay is one of the finest natural harbors in the world. It requires almost no maintenance dredging. I think the only reason it does require some maintenance dredging is because of the carriers. They have a 42-foot clearance, I think, is needed. But that's only every decade or something, maybe, to even less. Yeah. So I think that's the biggest issue is like Chris mentioned, the tidal prism, but mainly the configuration of the entrances. And I got to make one comment about Webb. I think he's got a great future as a quiz show host.
Thank you. So, Mr. Mayor, it's a modest requirement compared to Bataquitos Lagoon and Agua Hedionda Lagoon. It's probably pretty similar to Los Penasquitos Lagoon.
Okay. And I thought I heard, I think Mr. Flick said something about the tidal prism of Mission Bay was big and it had less sand. And I thought I heard you say that the bigger tidal prism brought more sand in. And is that because of the available sand from the beach replenishment in North County? There's more to pull in, or do you hit a certain size where it gets so big that it really works?
It's the jetties that protect the Mission Bay entrance channel from sand freely entering. The jetties, the navigation channel jetties were installed there intentionally to prevent it from being shoaled, but it still gets shoaled. Where there are no jetties at San Alejo Lagoon, it's a wide open, similar to San Dieguito as well. No jetties and Los Pen. No jetties, it's a free entrance. Bataquitos Lagoon was engineered and installed with jetties intentionally to knock down or reduce the amount of sand that comes in, although it still enters.
And so since we're talking dredging and total capacity and utilization of dredging equipment, is it possible to look at the annual maintenance requirement throughout San Diego County, for that matter, throughout San Diego County, Orange County, and LA, and maybe even Santa Barbara? In other words, we're talking numbers in the 350 to 600,000 cubic yards per year would be where that tipping point gets. Alan may have referred to, was marginal, but if we get well above that, and it seems like if we're starting with 40,000, that it wouldn't take a whole lot to get up to 300 to 600 to 1 million cubic yards annual per year. And it's just a matter of how big of a swath we need. So if you could comment on that.
Well, you're entirely correct. When added up cumulatively, the amount of sand that needs to be removed from all these entrances could add up to a significant amount and may trip the need for some coordinated dredging. There's also the need for beach nourishment, like you mentioned, not just San Diego County, but in Orange County, LA County, Ventura County, Santa Barbara County. And so I don't know if staff would like to comment on collaboration that's potentially underway right now.
I would, and I've got a follow-up question for you, Mr. Webb, or one of the coastal engineers. So right now, we do these projects one-off in San Diego County. Last one we did is 2012, the one before that was 2001. And so it's cobbling together. It takes a decade or so to get the funds together. Then they have to go through the environmental process, and it's very inefficient. As you've heard from panel experts here, it's having a known cycle or sequence of dredging reduces the cost and allows for more competition and allows for overall better efficient project. So how do we get there? Probably San Diego alone doesn't drive that. So what if we partner with Orange County? Okay, that helps that. What if we partner with all the 5 counties in Southern California and do something on a cycle? Every year, one county gets the dredge, and then it works that way down the coast or up the coast. So that's the vision that we've discussed doing it with our counterparts in the other counties. So we've created now a Southern California Sand Collaborative. It's the SANDAG counterparts up in LA, Orange County, Ventura, Santa Barbara. And so we're talking just in initial stages about how do we do something more collaborative so that we can increase the frequency of nourishment up and down the coast, and therefore not have these one-off projects that take a decade plus to do. Early days, it's a future discussion for this body, but we just want to kind of highlight that there is a plan that's forming and a possibility. And like I said, the possibility has to be turned into reality. The question I will bring back to you, Mr. Webb, and for any of the panel members is taking the sand out of the inlets alone enough to restore the beaches? And how does that play in with the shoreline policies and what was envisioned for that?
I can answer that. Mr. Greer, no, it's not. It's enough to replenish and renourish between larger nourishment projects that the region should be doing. There was a regional sediment management plan prepared for the San Diego region back in 2009. And the conclusion of that was that approximately every 5 years, there should be about 1 million cubic yards of sand placed along North County, San Diego shorelines. In between those every 5-year projects, and maybe it's every 10 years and it's double that, 2 million every 10 years, 1 million every 5 years, something to that effect. In between those, though, there should be the removal of sand as complete as possible from the collection points at the inlet, creek mouths, lagoon mouths, et cetera, within the lagoons. It should be pulled out, placed on the shoreline, and let it move again and continue its route down coast. Or maybe moved, as Mr. Murphy indicated, up coast, which is called back passing. There's a term. Pull it out of the lagoon, put it on the coast. To the north, it's called back passing because you're putting it back to where it came from, where bypassing is where you put it just on the beach and it continues its pathway to the south over time, assuming that the movement is north to south, which is my understanding over time. So, Mr. Greer, the answer is no, the volume's not enough, but it is enough to offset the deficit of sand in between larger nourishment projects. There's a number that the region loses every year from its shoreline. And that number, it requires, it's, on the order of 1 million cubic yards every 5 years. Naturally decrease, it leaves this shoreline and it needs to be offset by nourishment. It's not that much, it's less than that actually. Nourishment would offset that loss and then add accretion and widen beaches over time. So where after 50 years, you'd have 250-foot wide beaches. And with sea level rise, you could still do that. You just increase the volume.
So, sorry, I half raised a hand. Thank you. I had a question because we've kind of committed to programmatic approach, right, to doing this regularly. And we know from previous regional beach sand projects that when we place a whole lot of sand on the beach, the lagoons get a whole lot more. And you can correct me if I'm wrong. But so shouldn't we be thinking about that if we're going to be programmatically putting more on the beach, the lagoons are going to need a whole different level of management from their dredging?
I think that answer is affirmative, that the lagoons would need to be monitored very like they are today, but the amount of maintenance dredging would likely increase at each site. To what degree, I do not know, but the monitoring would help shed light on that and determine it.
Chuck Mesa, do you want to talk about the monitoring that the Corps is doing?
As part of our Encinitas to Solana project, we were required to monitor the 4 lagoons. And what we're doing right now is we have a 2-year post-construction monitoring. It started at the end of when we finished Solana Beach. That was around April of 2024. So our data collection will go for 2 years through 2026. And the idea is to try to we are using all available data that SANDAG is collecting, your beach measurements. We've actually supplemented that with an additional 5 transects. We're using that intensively. We're also collecting our own aerial photogrammetry of the lagoons themselves. And the idea is by taking a controlled aerial photo twice a year, can we determine how a inlet is changing and has it changed to cause a significant difference? That's our challenge. So that's ongoing right now. Our data collection will go through 2026, and in 2027, we should be on the verge of issuing a report summarizing the analysis of it.
Very good. Go ahead, Mayor.
Thank you very much. This has been a terrific panel, really educational. It's a delight to have you all here as experts to advise us. I learned several things and I have questions about them. So I learned, and I'd like to use them to connect the dots for perhaps a way that we might do things a little differently in our region. So one of the things I heard is that hopper and hydraulic are the most efficient dredges. I didn't hear a definition of hydraulic, so one of my questions will be, what's that? I also heard that the hoppers it's difficult for them to get it onto the beaches sometimes, so we need to do the piping. So here's my real question. Can we use hoppers in our region to get sand into the nearshore area where the natural annual flux of summer bringing sand onto the beaches and then winter it goes back out into this intermediate region? Could the hoppers feed the nearshore sand? And my third question, so the first was what's hydraulic? The second is, can we utilize the nearshore with hoppers in our region? And the third is grain size. So if we go to Fletcher Cove and we go to the beach, the new sand is different from the previous sand. So the new sand is from 2 miles and further offshore of Del Mar, where I'm on the city council. And we got a lot of questions from our residents about, are those dredges and barges really 2 miles offshore? We actually learned how to track them using the various ships tracking databases that there are, and they were 2 miles offshore. But that grain size is different. So does grain size matter here? And are we seeing shifting of the sand southward more quickly into the lagoons because the grain size is larger as it is? Thank you.
I can answer. I can start the answering if that's all right. Okay. So the definition of the hydraulic cutter head suction dredge, it's different than the hopper dredge. The hopper dredge is a vessel that basically sucks sand off the floor through arms, off the seabed through its arms, stores it in its hull, steams to a place offshore and it anchors, hooks up to a buoy and a discharge line and pumps out of its hull through the discharge line all the way to the beach and it spits out on the beach. The cutter head suction dredge is a different animal. It's like the Oceanside Harbor maintenance dredge, the H.R. Morris or whatever it's called, that sits in the harbor. It sits in one place and just basically agitates the seabed, the harbor bed, and pulls sand in through its pipe and in through its arm into a pump that just sends it right out the back of the dredge through a pipe. So it sits in one place, pulls off the harbor bed, and then shoots it down to the beach near the pier. So the hopper dredge is moving. It's a vessel that's moving around like mowing the lawn and then stopping, taking a break, pumping on shore, and then going back out and doing it, where the cutter head suction just sits in one place and does not move around. And then it will have to move once it's done dredging in that spot, and it'll be moved with a series of pulleys, anchors, and poles, and whatever they want to call them, spuds. So that's the difference between them. You don't put a cutter head suction in the open ocean too often because it can't handle rough seas and it has to take shelter in a harbor. Like in North Orange County, it's able to do that. In San Diego County, it's really not. There's no harbor nearby. Okay, so can you use hoppers in the region to do nearshore nourishment? The answer is absolutely. You could do that. In fact, the Regional Sediment Management Plan put together in 2009 called for a suggested pilot project where sand could be dredged in the vicinity of north of the Oceanside Harbor, up coast along Pendleton, brought around by a hopper and dropped near shore south of the pier to feed San Diego, North County, with the understanding that the current direct is taking sand from north to south on average over the long term. There's certain discussions about that, but nonetheless, the answer is yes, it could. It's less expensive to do it that way because you don't have to pump it through the pipe to get to shore, and you don't have to put the pipe in place and manage the pipe and grade the beach and make it a beautiful beach template, but you don't see it on the beach right away.
Right.
So if people are looking for a quick summer fix and a magic beach, that's the way to do it, is to pump it up there. But if you want to wait for Mother Nature to take it up there, it'll do it. No questions asked. As long as it's dropped shallower than the closure depth, which is approximately minus 30 feet deep off of North County, San Diego. So this dredge has to get in shallow enough to do that. So I don't know if any of these guys want to tell me you can't do that. Maybe you should tell me that.
I think so minus 30 feet. And then as you're building sand, you're putting sand there. It's not minus 30 feet any longer. And you also have to consider the swell that's coming in. So I think that would be fairly difficult to essentially to fill the hopper with sand. And then the hoppers typically draft somewhere between 20 and maybe 25 feet. And then sail it into, say, 30 foot of water. And you have to take the swell into consideration. And at that point, I'm sure your dredges.
Yeah, I think it's just the opposite. 30 feet is the closure depth. You have to bring it in where it's less than 30 feet.
Right. So we'd have to bring it into less than 30 feet of water. So I think it would be a little difficult because in order to release the sand, our hopper dredges have bottom dump doors that go further down than the hull as well. So to get in that depth of water, it's a bit tricky with the sea conditions and to not damage your dredge while you're doing that. I think that would be a very difficult task.
Are there smaller dredges that could do it as opposed to the bigger ones?
Not that meet air quality requirements in our fleet.
Here, I can, if you did get a smaller dredge with that, you're going to jump in unit costs. So you're probably it's going to end up more expensive likely than just pumping it to the beach and getting it where you want it.
So the answer is really not. It's not terribly feasible to do that, is what I'm hearing all of you say, unless there's another way to discharge it out of the hole to get it into shallow
You
water.
could rainbow it. You could sail in and rainbow it, but you're still taking the time to rainbow it versus just putting it on the beach with a 10-15% adder for the shore.
And then you'd have losses in the water column.
Yeah.
How shallow can the dredge get to rainbow? How shallow does it need to come in to actually do the rainbow?
20 to 25 foot.
Sorry.
20 to 25 foot, roughly. Average industry, like Lynn said.
So there is the possibility to bring it closer into shore, rainbow it in, and let the water quality be impaired for a little while. But it's, I mean, in my opinion, that's not that big of a deal, but that's just my opinion. All right, so I'll take back, my answer wasn't very good. Chuck.
I just want to elaborate on what the panel just mentioned. First of all, to get that teaspoon of sand, the last mile from the hopper dredge to the beach is really difficult and it's really expensive. So what you mentioned, ma'am, is what we call nearshore placement. It's very much easier to do. And there are other benefits. As long as you put it in the active littoral zone, then you're getting benefits from it. But as Chris mentioned, everybody wants it on the beach. And if you put it in the nearshore, no one sees it. And there's 100% of that sand does not make it out on the beach. There is a very large fraction that stays underwater. And that's just a fact of life. The difficulty is we want to put it as shallow as we can. However, these hopper dredges draw so much that they can't get that shallow. They have to leave enough water depth for the ship and the size of the mound that they're going to drop. So necessarily that disposal point gets to much deeper water. The Corps of Engineers, we do this every year in Morro Bay. We use the Corps of Engineers dredge Yaquina, and we dredge around May. We dredge the entrance channel and we go offshore a mile or two and we put it, it ends up being around 40 feet deep because of all the requirements for the disposal area. But so yes, it's can be done, and there are very good reasons to do so. But most of the cities, they want to sand on the beach. But there's a lot that goes into that computation, that decision.
So the last part of the question was about grain size, and grain size is key. And for the Regional Beach Sand 2 project, the team found sand that was coarse grained compared to the existing beach. The existing beach grain size on average is about 1/4 of a millimeter, 0.25 millimeters. But SANDAG found sand that was 0.5 millimeters, double the grain size on the existing beach, and put approximately 1.5 million cubic yards of sand in the system that was that grain size in 2012. And it looked different. It was gold color, orange gold, and you could visually track it. It worked very well in terms of longevity. It stays on the beach longer because it's heavier and it takes more force for the ocean to pick it up and move it and take it to a different location. Once it also is less prone to enter into a tidal entrance channel and go into a wetland. However, once it gets in there, it's harder to get out. So there's trade-offs, but we almost always say, try to find coarser grain sand. So if the Corps did that for that project at Encinitas Solana Beach, I think that's a win and a very positive thing, because SANDAG can take advantage of that for their RBSP 3.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you all for coming today. Really appreciate the discussion and the time that you took to be here. We will continue to discuss it and figure out the solutions, but thank you so much. Yes. Oh, well, I am sorry. Please go ahead. Oh.
I'm sorry to cut you off there. So I want to thank the panel as well. It was very interesting. So we're here talking about beach replenishment and any efficiencies to minimize costs. So that's kind of the focus of the conversation today. And I think that I heard that for beach replenishment in San Diego and along the California coast, we need a hopper dredge, a large hopper dredge. We're going to suck it off the bottom on various borrow sites. And we are going to install piping to pipe a slurry mixture onto the beach and then place it around. Is that about right? Okay, and I think the query that I hear going around these meetings is, should San Diego and Orange County, should the region buy a dredge to make it more efficient? Just to kind of get to the bottom line of what I'm hearing, in a government agency. And I think what I heard today is that the ownership and operation of a dredge is an extremely costly and complex thing. Is that what I heard? And I believe I heard Moffitt and Nichols basically say it would be a bad idea. Now, I just want to ask any of you in the industry, I would assume your answer is going to be yes, that there are a lot of risk factors to being in this industry and owning a dredge.
Yes, tremendous. We spend a lot of time and money on our safety programs to keep our people healthy and safe. And there's a lot of litigation exposure as well in the industry. I'll let you add to it.
Yeah, there's a lot of risk of damage to the vessel. Like you said, and you have 17 crew members living on board roughly on average every vessel. So there's a great deal of risk.
Okay, ownership, operation, legal issues, breaking down, getting jobs, all those things contribute. So do you know of any municipality or government agency that owns the kind of hopper dredge in the United States that we would need for sand replenishment? Any state? Any government agency in the country other than the federal government?
That owns a hopper dredge of this size?
Yeah.
No, I don't know
Okay.
of any.
So I think in our search for efficiencies, and I've heard a lot of good ideas today in terms of maybe a more periodic approach to sand replenishment done regionally that would maybe, increase the need for a dredge here, may reduce bidding, maybe bidding a project when we already know a dredge is going to be here up at Columbia River, so you don't have the 21 days to come around into the West Coast. Maybe that would reduce the cost. But from my standpoint, I think what I've heard today is a very strong opinion that should dissuade us from going down the road to actually look at buying and operating an hopper dredge as part of our search for more efficiencies for beach replenishment. That's what I've gotten out of this today, and I appreciate the expertise that sits on the panel. But as far as I'm concerned, we're a regional planning agency. We really do not have a core competency in this, so I think that we would really have to. I think it wouldn't be a very good idea from my standpoint to actually look into ownership of an operation of a dredge. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I think that's a good summary of what we heard today. I appreciate you guys having your industries. I would not like to get into that industry for us. Is there any more wrap-up comments by you, Keith?
Let me just talk about what comes next. So thank you very much to the panels for giving your insight, very helpful. So in December at your next working group meeting, we'll be talking about updating the existing SANDAG shoreline policies. For those who've been on the panel for a while or the working group for a while, you'll remember that last year we looked about the science, like what's the science day? And then we identified a gap where we have multiple policies strewn around multiple documents done over multiple years. So starting in December, we're going to take an effort to collapse those into one policy updated with the best available science and including some of the stuff we've heard about today. So we'll take this information that we've heard today. We'll include you in December about a work plan for moving forward those shoreline policies, and we'll conscript some of you to serve on that task force, which will help guide that policy document. So that's where this is going, and you'll have more opportunities to talk about policies and talk about SANDAG's efforts in those policies for implementing shoreline strategies. So more in December.
Great. Sounds good. Thank you so much, and see you in December.